I mean, it's not like smell-o-vision, but I mean, you're not trying to smell it. Feel-o-vision, it's softer. It feels like butter. Blending with your acrylics. Feel free to go to the timestamps in the description. I will be talking about gradients. I'm going to show you how to blend, how to make a gradient, some brushes, and mixing your acrylics to more easily blend them. Everyone's happy. First of all, a gradation is essentially smoothly, that's not a word, blending a color, one color, and transitioning into a different color. The transition in between colors, you really want to be seamless. In my example, I'm just using two colors, white and this purpley Rouge Carmine is what it's called. It's a new paint for me, and I was a little bit unfamiliar with its texture. It's a little bit like pudding. I don't know if I like it, but it depends on what type of a technique or an application that I'm using it in. You can add some water. The first layer, I did add a little bit too much water. I ended up doing 2 more layers. But just, get a nice size brush for the size of whatever you're painting on. I'm painting on a canvas wrapped board. Canvas wrapped boards are really good to experiment with. If I'm trying out a new technique, I'll use a canvas wrapped board instead of a regular canvas. This is the brush that I'm using. It is a bright. It's a stiffer texture. Getting the softer synthetic bristles. I don't have a bigger example to show you, but this is the biggest where it's not like smell-o-vision, but I mean, you're not trying to smell it. Feel-o-vision, it's softer. It feels like butter. Those I have had more success getting a smoother blend. You can get a specific brush, but you don't have to. Just make the strokes light. Work your way up and down the canvas as you're blending. Don't press too hard. Use a very light, rhythmic, side-to-side action going. The whole point behind gradient exercises is to not only get used to the feel of your brushes and your paint, but to help wrap your head around values. The better you understand value, the more lifelike the subjects in your paintings will be. As an artist, you are creating the illusion of light by using different colors and tonal values. I did a video on hue and value that I'll link in the video and the description if you're interested, but I wanted to touch a little on value in this video. If you think about values in terms of black and white, it's easier to think about, where you have a white, a middle gray, and a black. That's the basics. In my example, my black would be the darkest of that, what was it called? Rouge Carmine color. So the rouge color would be my black, and then my middle gray would be the transition, and then the white would be my lightest. It ended up being a pink. Generally, you want to use synthetic brushes with acrylic. You'll find there is a range of soft to stiff brush texture. I would recommend using a soft brush texture if you're painting with thin paint, like fluids, or if you're watering down your paint in some way. And then a more stiff brush if you're using a thicker paint, a higher viscosity, like a heavy body. Get the size of brush appropriate to the size of your painting. If it's a big canvas and you're painting a lot of ground, get a bigger brush. If it's a small canvas, get a smaller brush, okay? Another important part is what you mix with your paints. Usually, you would just mix some water with it if you need it a little bit lower viscosity. Depending on the type of paint that you have, like a fluid versus a more thicker, where it's like the texture of pudding. The thicker body acrylic paints you might want to add water to if you're painting on gesso primed canvas. I also suggest thinking about adding some type of a thinning medium. When you're adding water, you want to be careful not to add too much water, because paint or the pigments need a binder in order to adhere or to stick onto the surface. If you're painting on paper, that's a different story, because paper is absorbable. Gesso is kind of compositionally made up similar to how paint is made up. So putting paint on top of the gesso, the paint needs a binder to stick to the gesso. So you don't want to thin it out too much with water, otherwise you thin the binder too much and the pigment molecules can't bind with each other. So if you are using a gesso primed canvas, if you're adding water, I recommend following the 70-30 rule, where it's 70% paint, 30% water, or you can use a thinning medium. I prefer, and I would recommend, an airbrush medium. It has a very similar texture to water, which waters it down and also includes a binder to it so that it helps it adheres to your canvas. Right now I'm working on experimenting with a home recipe for an airbrush medium. It's going to be a future video. I'm going to do some experimenting with a store-bought airbrush medium and then making my own, compare and contrast, see which works better. There you go. I hope that all made sense. If you liked this or you learned something, hit the like button. It helps support me, and I'll see you in the next one. The more smooth the blend, the less apparent the bus. Everyone's happy in the sack.